So we've seen ways of manipulating whole lists and finding max, minimum, those kind of things. How do we deal with parts of the list? So how do we get hold of individual items or maybe a section of the list? Well, for individual items, we've actually seen that we can use the square bracket. So list brackets n gives us the item of the list with index n, remembering that the indices start from 0. And also you can do that to get to work from the end of the list. So this is a nice feature in Python. It doesn't happen in every programming language. If you use a negative list index, it starts from the end of the list and works backwards. So list -1 returns the last item, and list -2 returns the next to last item. That gives us individual elements. What if you want a portion of the list? If you want a portion, you can use the slicing functionality. And slicing, it just takes a slice of the list, which can be sliced in lots of ways. And it's very similar to the way that the range function works. So we saw different sets of parameters for range. Slicing works in a very similar way. Okay, so slicing, we can use the format list with the start of the slice, the end of the slice, and the increment. Just like we have these three values were possible when you use the range function. So start is the index of the first value. End is the index of the last value plus 1. So if I say list 0 to 10, 0:10, it will give me the value 0 up to 9. An increment is a gap between each value. So that, by default, that's set to 1. Okay. So you don't need to provide all these values. If you just pass the first one, the start, that's just like taking an individual item. If you pass 2 values, that gives you the start and the end. And if you then want an increment, you can give 3 values. So, for example, if we got numbers going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so the length of the list is 6, then numbers 1, 3, 1 returns a list. So this will always give us back a list. What will be in that list? It'll be starting at the value with index 1. So it's, as it happens in this list, is 1, and it'll go up to the index to the item with index 3, but not including it. So it'll give us it'll give us 1 and 2, but not 3. And go up by 1. It'll just give us, it's going up each index by 1. So the first value is index 1. The next one is index 2. The next one is index 3, but it only goes up to 2 because we've told it the end is 3. If we do 0, 5, 2, what happens then? Well, it starts at 0, goes up to 5, so it doesn't include this 5. So it would be the list 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But we've said the increment is 2, so it goes up by 2 every time, so it gives us 0, 2, 4. Okay, so just to say the defaults then, to repeat, the start, end, and increment values can be left unspecified, actually. You don't have to put any of them in. But if you're missing out the start and end, you have to include the colons. So, for example, if you leave the colon increment out, it defaults to 1. So list from start to end is the same as list from start to end, with the going up by 1 every time. Likewise, if you miss it out entirely, so here, notice it's slightly different. I've put the colon in, but it's taking the default. If the colon's there, it'll take the default, which is 1. So that's exactly the same. If I miss out the end, these values default to start plus 1 and 1 respectively. So list start, that's just, as we've seen, that's just one value. It's the same as saying list start plus 1, which is the same as saying list start plus 1, 1. So it's just the one value at the index start. If the end is not specified, it defaults to the length of the list. So, for example, list start, and then I've left a space here, nothing. It's just like saying the whole list. So start to the end of the list for the increment. And if you miss out the start, so list here, this bit of code here, list brackets with a colon end increment is the same as starting from 0. This is kind of specialized usage. So I'm not, I wouldn't necessarily expect you to remember this, but you might notice it in bits of code that you see, and this is what it's doing. So, for example, if you want single values, can you predict what's going to happen when I do this? Letters 1. Okay, think about that. It's just going to be, well, that's the 0th item, so it's going to be B. Oops, letters -1. You probably saw that. We start at the end and we go backwards, so it's the last one. -1 means start at the end and go backwards, so it's G. -3, start at the end, go backwards, so G is -1, F is -2, E is -3. -10, harder to work out. In fact, you get an error because it can't go. There's only 7 items in the list. It'll go. It tries to go beyond that, and it gives you an error. You wouldn't necessarily be able to predict that. Let's have a look at some. That's single values. Let's have a look at some slices. So what happens when we have that and we want :1? Well, remember, if we leave out the 0. Sorry, we leave out the start, it defaults to 0. So that will give us 0 up to 1, which will just actually be A, because it's up from 0 up to, but not including 1. So it's just the index 0. 1:. Okay, what happens there? So that starts at 1. So it starts at B, which is the value with index 1. And then it just goes up to the end of the list. So that's going to be B, C, D, E, F, G. 1 up to the end. So this starts at 0 and goes up to -1. So it goes up to G, but doesn't include it. Okay, so letters 0. I mean, the default, the missing value here defaults to 0. So it goes from 0 up to -1. So it goes up to the end of the list, but not including the last one. -1 onwards. Okay, so that goes from G, but it goes upwards. So it starts from the last one and goes up to the end, which is obviously just G. So again, these are quite hard to decipher unless you use them all the time. What about this? Letters 2, 4. Remembering that list was A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Letters 2, 4 goes from A, B, C is 2, D is 3, E is 4, but it doesn't include the 4th one, the index 4, so it's C and D. 5 to 100. You might think that would give you an error, but actually it'll just go from the 5th one, which is F, up to the end of the list. So you don't get an error by going beyond the list. You might think you would, but you don't. Letters ::2. Okay, so remember, if I leave out those values, start and end, then it defaults to the beginning and the end of the list. But this one jumps up in increments of 2, so it will give me A, C, E, and G. So the whole list, but going up by 2 values every time. 1:2. Same thing again, except now we're starting from 1. So we start from B, the item with index 1, and we go 1. So sorry, B, D, F. Again with this gap of 2. Letters with 2 missing values, but -1. So this starts at A and goes up to G, but it goes down by -1. So it's actually going G, F, E, D, B, C. So it's going backwards. Okay, no, I think some of those are not necessarily obvious. Worth knowing about, but you might not be able to predict the answer, and they're quite hard to remember. Okay, I'm going to finish this video here, and then we'll move on to the last one.